Welcome back to another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler, and on today's episode, I interview the amazing Geralyn Gendreau. She is a psychotherapist, a life coach, and the author of Jungle Gene. Now sit back and relax and enjoy this episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. What is up, podcast land? Welcome to another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. Before I introduce my beautiful guest, Geralyn Gendreau, it's French. I want to first tell everybody where they can hear the podcast. You can hear it pretty much anywhere that you listen to audio podcasts. Stitcher, iHeart, Pandora, you name it, that's where you can find it. Just do me a favor, just make sure you hit the subscribe button and the automatic download button. That's just important for me as far as my metrics, knowing that my listeners are actually downloading and listening to the podcast. If you want to learn more about me and you want to learn more about my book that I wrote many years ago, Brothers Love, a Memoir, which is a story about my life growing up with my brother Andy, who was autistic and had a severe stutter and unfortunately was killed in a car accident in 1989. And the book just details our life together, growing up outside of Philadelphia and the struggles of growing up single mom and all that stuff that comes with growing up in the 70s poor. And then how after his death, my life was impacted and how I became the person I am as a result of the lessons I learned from my brother. So if you want to learn more about that, go to mattcubbler.com. You can also order the book there and learn more about my career and things I'm doing in leadership development, mentoring for kids and public speaking. So mattcubbler.com if you want to learn more about that. All right, without further ado, Geralyn, how are you?
I'm great.
I'm so happy we made this. I sort of screwed up on scheduling, and I'm usually pretty good with scheduling, but I've got the last month has been really hectic for me, and not to make any excuses, but I just shit the bed on that, and I apologize. But I'm glad we're here now, and that I'm going to be able to share your story and share all the amazing things that you've done and the books you've written and the things you're involved in, and I'm excited to do that. Because I think this is the first, when I look at your bio and when I agree to have people on the show, I try to have as much diversity on my guests. I don't want to have the same thing over and over again. So yours stuck out as something I haven't had on the show yet. And
which part?
Everything from your background and your counselor stuff and the books you wrote and how the type of book you wrote and what you wrote about, like those things were all very different for me on the show. So I'm excited to share it.
Great.
So you're out on the left coast.
I am California.
I was telling you before the show that it's what you're looking out at your window is probably much nicer and much more majestic than what I see looking out my window. If I look out one window, I see 2 nuclear reactors.
Oh my goodness.
That's one of my views. So I think you probably got me beat.
I have a beautiful hillside out that side and the San Francisco Bay out that side, the north part of the bay.
Right.
Not anywhere as interesting as the Golden Gate Bridge, but still, we're pretty much out on the end of a private road where it's really quiet. I do hear the coyotes at night, though.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Funny, not a funny story, but just a random story. When I was in high school, I was in the marching band, and all the steel for the Golden Gate Bridge came from my hometown, Pottstown, Pennsylvania. And so on the 75th anniversary of the Golden Gate Bridge back in 1987, they had a big to-do, and they invited dignitaries from Pottstown and the high school marching band, and we were marching across the bridge. There was over 1 million people on the bridge, and the bridge actually flattened.
I remember that. I actually was working I wasn't at work that day, or I don't remember, but I worked on Fisherman's Wharf at that point in time. So I heard about it. I heard about the big march and the flattening. Yeah.
It was insane. I mean, afterwards, I didn't know what the hell was going on during it, but afterwards, and we saw the news, like, holy crap. Like,
right.
Really, that's not meant to happen. So, but we did get to play backup. Our jazz band played backup to Tony Bennett as he sang San Francisco.
Oh, beautiful.
But yeah, that's my only San Francisco story that I have. But all right, so I ask one question, and the reason why I ask one question is because as a cop, I don't know the answer to the victim's issue or the suspect's crime. And so I usually ask one broad question, which opens up their mind a little bit and allows me to see how they formulate thoughts and answers on a question that might be very broad.
Yeah.
It helps open up the mind a little bit. So I'm going to ask you a very broad question, and I hope you don't mind me asking, who is Geralyn Gendreau?
Well, who am I? I love that question. I think right now, these days, I'm most identified with being an author and actually biographer of this book. I've been a ghostwriter and editor for over 20 years. So I've written other books. None of them have had my name on it. So you can imagine that there is one that the authors put me on it as a with author. So this is my first solo book that I've done from start to finish. And it is about my mentor, Jean Liedloff. So I'm also a psychotherapist, and I discovered Jean during the period of time when I was during the internship where I was getting my hours back in the 90s. And when I got out of graduate school, I was kind of like, okay, now that I know everything about psychopathology and neurosis and can name everyone and assign it a number out of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, where are the happy people? Where are the happy, well-adjusted human beings, and how in God's name did they get there? That's what I was interested in. I went to graduate school to sort myself out. That didn't work out very well. So I kind of stumbled on Jean's work. I didn't go looking for her until I'd read her book. I had been working at Women's Alcoholism Center in San Francisco, and the women in that program, it was a year-long reunification program. And our clients were women who had lost their children to Child Protective Services. And every one of them was either alcoholic. In those days, crack was the street drug of choice. So most of them had been addicted to crack cocaine. And many of the children were either fetal alcohol syndrome or crack babies. And we had this parenting manual, and it made no sense to me. I was like, what do you mean she can't lay down with her baby when she wants to take a nap? Like, wouldn't that comfort this poor little baby that's got fetal alcohol syndrome? Like that just seemed like so I eventually had to quit that job because my maternal instinct was hopping mad. I never had kids, but I have a maternal instinct. So at that point, I was out of graduate school, and I picked up a book called The Chalice and the Blade by Riane Eisler, who I'm proud to say endorsed this book. She was one of the authors who endorsed Jungle Jean. And she had written a very authoritative scholarly book on ancient civilizations, peaceful civilizations based on cooperation rather than domination. That book is called The Chalice and the Blade. So I had read it, and I was like, okay, playfully saying, I need to find a time machine and go back to that time when people were, like, I need to see how they raised their kids. What did their parenting manual look like? And a friend of mine said, oh, you don't need a time machine, just read this, and handed me Jean Liedloff's book. So I read it in an afternoon, and it absolutely blew my mind, because what she talks about is not something psychology is really that aware of, which is she has an evolutionary perspective, because she lived with the indigenous people of the Amazon in 1950. In the 50s and 60s, she spent the better part of 3 years down there on 5 different expeditions. And she observed the way of life. She always said, I went back to the Stone Age. So these people had never seen civilized people. It was before we just started destroying the rainforest. In fact, back then, they didn't even call it a rainforest. That hadn't really entered the lexicon. They thought of it as the jungle. And Jean was brilliant, and she was not educated. I mean, she was educated, but she got kicked out of Cornell. And she always said that when she got kicked out, that was the end of the interference, because she considered academia to be something that narrows people's point of view. And what she saw, she was able to see because she didn't come to it with a preconceived idea about what she was looking at. So after 5 expeditions, she wrote this book that's actually a treatise on human nature, but it became a child rearing classic. And you may have been, your mother may have been influenced back in the 70s among the hippies and the baby boomers. Suddenly baby wearing became a trend. Women would get the sling and carry the baby around on their hip. And then we came out with the snuggly, which is like one step removed, but still better than putting the baby in a stroller or in the pram and leaving them in the other room to cry themselves to sleep. Because these people, the baby was in contact with the mother's body until it was ready to go on its own. So I always say that a human infant's dependency needs, if their dependency needs get met, they grow into their independence naturally when they've had that foundation, because a human infant is actually born very, very premature. We're the only mammal that doesn't get up on its legs and start trotting around on its four legs. And it's because we became upright. When you go bipedal, the pelvis shrinks.
Yeah.
So you got to push that baby out before the head gets too big. And especially since our ancestors were then developing a neocortex, so the head's even bigger. So what are you going to do? You're going to deliver a premature baby.
Never thought of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. That like came to me one day when the thing about the interesting new ideas is when different ideas suddenly merge in the mind of someone. Like there's nothing original, but there are original syntheses of what's already existing out there. And Jean certainly did that. And I have that kind of mind. And not everybody has original thoughts, but when you are a person that has original thoughts, it's like it buckles your knees when it comes. And that was one of a few that I've had, having studied her work. So I knew her for 15 years. I knew her personally. She lived in Sausalito on a houseboat, and I became her assistant and then started a nonprofit for her. And one of the interesting things about this book is, as brilliant as Jean was, and as much as she identified what makes truly functional human relationships, she had a really difficult time in relationship. And we had a difficult relationship. And I didn't hide any of that. I tell the real story about her. And you see why, because of her upbringing and the way she was treated when she was born and throughout her life. She was not treated as though she were worthy and welcome. That was the phrase she always used, is that what we need is to feel worthy and welcome as a foundation.
Let me ask you a question. So one of the things that resonated with me and what you just said was, especially with Jean, some people call me a contrarian. I say I'm a counterculturist. I like to go in the opposite direction of everybody else, because I don't think that's interesting. Like, I need to see why are they not going that way? Or how do I get to the same place by going in a different direction? So that's been my sometimes recipe for failure, but also my recipe for success. You mentioned that she was not educated, but she was educated because she was a smart woman, but she didn't go through the academic route to get her credentials and give her validation saying, okay, you are now officially smart because we gave you a piece of paper.
We gave you numbers after your name, or letters rather. Yeah.
So when you became personally with her, outside of reading her book and saying, okay, this is groundbreaking, this is amazing stuff, and then you got to know her, what was, if you had to put I don't want to say a diagnosis, but break down the person who wrote the book and the person who you got to know, what do you think was the single greatest differentiator between the two?
Oh, wow. Between her book and who she really was? That's an interesting question. There's a couple things. One of the things is that I believe, and this came out of my work with her, that we all have a blind spot. There's something we do. And she told me this the first time we had lunch. She said, there's something I do that always pushes people away. And she said, Pussycat, promise me you won't go away. Just tell me what it is. And she'd been friends with Gloria Steinem, who, for people who don't know who Gloria Steinem is, she's the icon who wrote Revolution from Within and really started the women's liberation movement. She was one of the most important people in that movement. And they were friends, and Jean considered her intellectual equal. That was not something she granted many people. But she told me, I don't know what I did. I did whatever it is I do with Gloria Steinem. Just tell me what I do. So that troubled her throughout her life. She didn't talk about it except like that. She didn't understand really where it came from. It's not so much where it came from as how it operates, because it's in our blind spot. We can't see it. And so she said to me, she said, just tell me what I do. But when I would tell her, she would do it even more. So the way I look at it is it's kind of the foundations of the defensive structure, which is the negative ego. And the ego doesn't want to be found out. So if you say this is the thing, it goes, and that's what she would do. She would just like swipe me. It was horrible. It was painful for me. So I think the contrary, I'm a contrarian too, by the way, but I think the paradox of her, and I say that, right, some of the paradoxes in some of the marketing materials, like the paradoxes of that relationship were that she understood and wrote about what it is that makes human beings feel welcome and worthy, but she like trashed me and did not make me feel welcome. I'd walk in her house and she'd be like, don't you take your shoes off, don't get the, and like there'd be 3 criticisms before I even got into the living room. So she wasn't able to give other people what she believed and propounded as what people really need, because of her blind spot and because she hadn't received it when she was a child. So does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, because for me, like I think I'm pretty simple. Like who I am, it's not a Rubik's Cube. It's very out in the open. I wear everything on my sleeve. But there are people that look at me and say I'm very complex.
Mm-hmm.
And I always ask them how. And they're like, well, you just always got 100 things going on, and you're very I can be abrupt. I can be very forward.
Mm-hmm.
I can, and it depends on the situation as to how forward or direct or abrupt I am. I try not to be in gentle required situations where I need to worry about somebody's emotional state or well-being, but in general, I pretty much tell it like it is. And it seems like she was a woman who liked to learn about what things are and why things are, but didn't have the ability to apply them. And I am that way a lot, and that's why when you mention that, it just sort of, I'm a truth seeker. I'm a solution finder. But I don't necessarily want to know how it happened. Like I don't know how to do a lot of things. I can solve. My brain works great. I can visualize things. I can solve things. I can solve complex problems. I can solve crimes, but I can't physically do a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the things that I find out the solution to, I'm not necessarily any good at. I just was able to work through the logical progression or the whatever was required to get to the end result.
Sure.
And I think that's, if there's a blind spot for me, that's probably mine, is that I don't have, and I don't know if it's a lack of care or a lack of want to learn how to do those things. I just like the fact that I was able to solve it. I don't really need to know how to do it. And it sounds like she was more that kind of a person, whereas you were trying to use her knowledge. You were trying to learn from her all the things that she'd acquired during that time in the Amazon, so that you could then learn how to really use it, which was two different angles of looking at it.
Well, it's interesting because she was able to apply these principles. She became a child rearing expert. She worked with people all over the world, moms and dads, who would call and be like, okay, so how do I apply these principles in my family life? What do I do with my screaming kid? So she was really good at problem solving at that level. She wasn't, but she did develop her own form of therapy. I didn't find it particularly effective. But there was definitely something in her. I can see what you're saying. She would constantly say, I'm able to help all these people, but nobody can seem to help me. So she wasn't really able to look, she knew the story of her upbringing and what had gone wrong. She knew that crystal clear. What she couldn't do was look at herself and see how her wounding was impacting other people. So it was almost like there are no other people. Like she was kind of the center of the universe, except when it was moms and dads, then she could soften and care enough.
Well, that provided her worth.
That gave her worth. Now, I was just this bothersome thing often. She allowed me into her life because she had a writer's block. She always wanted to write a follow-up book, felt like her mission would not be complete if she didn't write, I call it the continuum parenting book. She hated the word parenting. She said, you can't turn a noun into a verb. That's like against the rules, So she called it non-adversarial child rearing. That's a mouthful. Continuum's enough of a mouthful. So I'm actually working on that book with the man who is her other steward of her work. I call us the torchbearers. So we'll be doing a follow-up book called Continuum Parenting. She may roll her over in her grave. Wait, no, she was cremated, so she won't roll over in her grave. But she was, I loved her dearly. And honestly, she was a pain in the butt. However, I'm a loyal person. I'm not trying to elevate myself. Maybe I just was clinging to her for who knows what reason, but she asked me to not go away. She said, please just tell me. And there was a period of 2 years where she was so mean to me that I was like, I'm done. And I lived in San Rafael at the time. And whenever my man and I would drive down the grade through Sausalito, he'd say, how's the houseboat lady? So I never really forgot about her. And I'd think of her every time I saw like some kid screaming in the grocery store and the parent just looking like, oh, what am I going to do with this child? I would think of Jean and I would hear her voice in my head. So I eventually did reconcile with her. And then she asked me on her deathbed to be her biographer. And so I spent the last 45 days of her life sitting at her side of her bed, asking questions, recording it all on my iPhone. So that's really where a lot of, actually some of the material and clarifications for the book came from that period of time. But really it was the 15 years of hearing her stories and having access to all of her effects, all the notes and all her journals from the rainforest were not intact. But there were years and years of her journals just reflecting and stuff. So I was very fortunate to have that material.
All right, I'm going to ask you an odd question. Maybe it's not odd, you're a psychotherapist, but so my background's in human behavior and body language. That's where I'm an expert according to Forbes. But what was it? And I always wonder why people stay, whether it's, I go to a domestic call and you have an abusive husband and a woman, calls you and wants you to fix the problem that night, but she doesn't want her marriage to go away. She just wants him to stop doing whatever that was that night. And there's always an excuse why she stays, and always an excuse why the relationship is going to be okay, and that make excuses for why the person did what they did. My question for you, because I can tell that there's this admiration for her mind and admiration for the things that she was able to uncover that are in your wheelhouse of want to understand more about. And then there's she wasn't very nice to you part. So what was the thing that kept you there? Why did you stay? Why did you stick and stay rather than cut bait and say, this old lady's a pain in the ass. I'm worth more than this.
Because I guess there were times, and I think this is true of, abused women as well. I don't know. I've never been abused. First time a guy hit me, I was like, I walked away. That was it. Like, sorry. Not happening. But with her, it was fairly subtle. I'll give you an example. Well, two examples. I love both of these examples. We'd go to lunch at the Depot Cafe in downtown Mill Valley. And one time I ordered the taco salad. And they bring you a basket of chips, or maybe the chips were on the plate. Doesn't matter. And she was like, stop crunching. I look at her and go, they're tortilla chips, like I'm not chewing with my mouth open. So it was little stuff like that. So it was maybe 10 to 15% of our relationship. And I might not even noticed it. I might have just thought, God, she's just, she's got a mean streak. It wouldn't have been so obvious to me if she hadn't asked me to tell her.
Right.
And that's when I got curious. The other example, I had published a book called The Marriage of Sex and Spirit. It was an anthology. So I was the editor and there was one chapter that I'd written. And I went to San Francisco for my first ever book signing. And I dressed in my San Francisco clothes instead of my flowy, flowery Marin County clothes. I just dressed I put a short black skirt on and black fishnets and boots and a black turtleneck sweater that she'd actually given me. And here I am in a turtleneck. Most of what I own shows cleavage. Okay. But I didn't think that was appropriate. So here I think I'm dressed relatively conservatively. I stop by her houseboat on my way back over the Golden Gate Bridge. And she opens the door and she looks at me and she goes, "You look like a tart." Like, okay, So it was just those flippant offhand remarks. And then she'd become this like little pussycat. And she was mostly kind of cantankerous and grumpy a lot. But there was another part of her that was just so brilliant and so funny. She had this amazing sense of humor. She used to say, punning is the lowest form of humor. Now, in my opinion, it's the highest form of humor. Absolutely. Because it's like, it takes brilliance to on the fly, like come up with some there's a lot of them are in the book. I was fortunate enough to remember some of them, and other people that knew her, we'd come up with things that, oh, would Jean have said this? Yeah, she would have said that. So that was a lot of fun, but she was truly a genius. And when you're around someone with that kind of mind, it's attractive. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to overlook it for the most part. The one incident that occurred, I think as she got older, she got, people when they get older, they have less, I don't know, their skin gets thinner or they just get entrenched in their ways. I've seen people who don't really change in their life. And it's like, I went to a high school reunion and I'm like, oh my God, same issues, same facial expressions, same tone of voice. Like that person has not gone through any transformation in their life and they've become kind of a caricature of themselves. It's very bizarre. Whereas at that same reunion, our football coach, I was a cheerleader and a lot of the cheerleaders were there too. And one of them was this caricature of her former self. But our football coach came up to me and he goes, "You look entirely different. What? You're not the same person." And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I mean, I started very young doing all the transformational workshops, the S training and the Life Spring, which is became landmark for the younger people in your audience who don't remember the S training. And I had a near-death experience. So that'll change you. That kind of experience.
Talk about that. You can't tee that one up without, let's talk about the near-death.
I baited you. No, first I want to say something about you that I find so interesting. You keep talking about that you're good at you said earlier before the show that you're good at the logic and that are you actually a detective?
I was for a while, yeah.
You are, okay. Yeah, I always thought if I was ever
counterterrorism, I've done a lot of different things. So
wow.
I was an intelligence officer in the military. So but the brain stuff is my, like, I don't do shit I don't want to do. Like, I just don't. Like, I'm just that guy. Like, you can't make me do something. You can't force me down a road. I won't be bullied or pushed. So if I'm not in, it's very clear.
Yeah.
No hiding. So for me, the logical understanding of how the brain works and how a victim's mind works and a criminal's mind works, and I've mentored kids for 30 years, understanding how different age groups, how their brains formulate thoughts and feelings, and understanding where they're headed and where were they and where are they headed, and helping them manage all the things going on in their bodies. And so for me, I find that completely inspiring to learn.
Yeah.
Because the greatest thing that you can have is the ability to communicate clearly with another human being. Yeah. And we're missing that entirely in a large portion of our country.
That's my father said that when I was trying to figure out what to study in college. And he said, well, you've got the gift of gab. So I became a communications major. And he said exactly what you just said. He said, if you can, that's the greatest gift you can have is the ability to communicate with other human beings. And you're right. It's sorely lacking in our culture, and more so now with social media.
Oh yeah.
And people not actually like, how can you actually, tone of voice means so much, never mind facial expressions. And if all of this is like going on via text, I mean, I know people develop friendships that way, but I don't know how deep those friendships can go.
So they're only as deep as they can stay virtual.
Yeah, or as you can
become real.
Yeah. Or as long as you can fake it and hold up that image that you want everybody to see in your Instagram feed or whatever. I'm a lot like you. It's like, I'm no bullshit. You know what I'm thinking. My face is, I cannot hide what I'm feeling. People kind of go, oh God.
Well, most people have an authentic self and an inauthentic self, and they can shift between the two, but one they can stay in for forever, and the other one's a limited period of time that they're able to actually remain there, and then it becomes exposed. And for me, I know my limit. I tell my wife all the time if we're going to a Christmas party with somebody, and I know the people are going to be like, listen, I got an hour and 20 minutes, and then the Matt's happy and loving this thing goes downhill real quick. So we gotta wrap this thing up. So I just. And I think there's and you'll probably agree that the ability to know thyself, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the willingness to accept those things for what they are, because there's some things that are just inherently you suck at, right? There's just things that just naturally you're not going to be talented in or have be well versed in or whatever the case might be, and I own that, and I'm okay with that. I just choose not to be in those. I'm very good at not doing those things and not being caught in a position where I'm vulnerable in those weak areas.
I'm really good at making sure there's a back door. I want to know there's an escape hatch. I don't often go to parties with I won't team up with a friend and go to a party. I'm like, no, I want to have my own car. So.
Right. I don't want to be stuck waiting for you to get done.
Right.
Well put. All right. So your life altering, your near-death experience.
Yes. I love to talk about this. It was such a powerful experience. I was a bartender in San Francisco at the time, and I was training for my black belt in martial arts. I trained for 3 years, and I decided to go on a vision quest. So I went with a girlfriend north of San Francisco, about an hour, to Point Reyes National Seashore. And we spent the whole afternoon. It's a 5-mile hike out to Arch Rock, and then we hiked another 1/4 mile north to Kellam Beach, and we hung out there all afternoon. Meditating, self-contemplation. I didn't have any big visions, so I was a little disappointed when it was time to go home, and I was really hot and sweaty. So I decided to go for a quick swim. And I grew up in California, had body surfed almost every beach in Southern California. And so I thought nothing of just running and dashing into the waves. Now, Southern California coast is the Santa Barbara Channel. There's islands out there, so it's not nearly as severe a drop. The ocean drops right into, what do they call that? I'm not thinking of the term, but the seawall or whatever. It drops quickly. So the way the waves come in and pound the shore is very different. And this was probably the first time I'd gone in the ocean since I'd been here. I only moved up here in 85, I think. So I hit a wave head on, crushed C3, fractured C2 and C4, was immediately, I was paralyzed. I didn't know it till later. But so you get an impact like that, and it makes a pretty awful sound. You not only feel it, but you hear the sound of your cervical spine being crushed. Is pretty frightening. But my very first thought was, so that's how it ends. You're like the 2 dates in the dash. It was like, okay, this was my, okay, that's the off ramp.
Right here it is.
Yep, here it is. It's over. So that was a pretty profound experience, because right after that, I went through, and I've written about this in detail, it's been published a few places. You can find it on Facebook. I think there's even a Facebook note about it. In fact, I'll put it in.
I'm currently banned from Facebook. So.
Oh, you are? I love people who get banned from social media. That's great. I'll tell you what, I'll put it on Medium. It's a good thing to put up on Medium. I have any number of articles up there. So anyway, I'll just give you the highlights. I went through this experience where my mind and my capacity to understand kept expanding and expanding. And it was like every question I ever had got answered, like one at a time. And I was just going, oh, I get it. Oh, I get it. Like screaming inwardly or whatever, but you're not in the same dimension. So it seemed like 20 minutes, but I didn't have brain damage, so I wasn't under it that long. And then I had another experience of people call it the life review. For me, it was kind of a it was like time kind of did a back bend, And all of a sudden, my entire life was there all at once, like this massive gestalt. And what I felt was the impact I'd had on people. Like, and you feel that all at once, and it's pretty intense. You know, it's like this giant karmic wave, and all of a sudden you're just like aware of how other people. And so in that experience, I suddenly realized, and it's timeless to a degree, I suddenly realized what it would be like to be my mother, who was a recent widow. My father had died just the year before. I realized what it would feel like and be like in her body to get the news, your daughter was killed this afternoon. And I said, shit, I can't die now. And that's when I popped to the surface, gasped for breath, and a whole nother process ensued. So that was very much a formative experience, and in many ways led me to Jean. When all was said and done, I was rescued. I realized I was paralyzed. There was this other sequence of events. And then when I finally was able to crawl and move again, I got to the dry sand, and I just laid in the warmth of the sand. And it was like the whole universe was nothing but liquid love and just pressing in on me from all sides. And I felt completely safe, completely loved, utterly at home in my own skin. And the thought came to me, this is what I truly am. Like, this is what I am. And then the next thought was, why haven't I ever felt this way before? So that's the question that eventually led me to Jean. You know, when I was always searching for I'm still searching for the answer to that question. I think I have a good grip on it now. What I'm still working on and what I help my clients with is how to get back there, because joy is our natural state. I'd love to read you an excerpt from the book that demonstrates that very clearly. But we don't realize this. We've been conditioned out of that. We've been taken away from the continuum. Most of us were not held next to our mother's body to know that we were totally safe and deeply loved on a physical level. You know, it's not just about somebody telling you. I mean, that's like the verbal. That's that's a fraction of it, like what we were just talking about. There's the physical contact, because an infant needs that. They're so helpless. And if you think about 7 million years of hominid evolution, we're living in huts and caves and whatever. They don't put there is no other room to put the baby in. There's one bed. There's one, you know, everybody sleeps in the same space. And we make such a big deal out of that. Like, well, what about mom and dad's privacy? Yeah, and I won't talk about it on the podcast, but there's a whole bit in here about the family bed. And one of people's first objections is like, well, what about our sex life? Well, you'll have to read the book to understand that, because I can't go there in a podcast, but it's really very beautiful. But let me find this one excerpt that really demonstrates this idea that I'm talking about, that joy is our natural state. Let me see, where is this? I thought I had it pulled up for just this reason. Come on.
I've been doing deep dives. I'm a rabbit hole diver, for the record. I go down all the rabbit holes, but the one I'm in now is the 5D consciousness and the 5D awakening. So I've been really exploring that a lot, just, you know, working through the probable, possible, plausible thoughts in there. But we're all love, you know, we're born love, and love then becomes eroded through ego and human hubris. And I just find it, you know, and it's hard, you know, I'm in a jaded world. I'm immersed in the shit. So it's hard to find joy in a daily when literally you only respond to shit. So there's no joy in that. But I found a way to remain joyful and thankful, and I try to have as much love, but I do have the side that will stick my thumb in your eye and leave it there until your brain shuts off. So that still exists. I just try to limit that until it's needed. But I digress. Let me hear your.
But you know, and that's a good point, because the indigenous people, this tribe, they weren't cannibals. So we have to be very careful in looking at something. And Jean was very careful not to create the noble savage thing. She thought that they were anything but savage. In fact, the Yakwana were considered a finished tribe. And I don't mean like, you're finished. It was more like finished as in complete and with the polished on it, because their society was so highly functioning. Now, certainly those people wouldn't be able to function in our society, but we've destroyed theirs. So we'll never really know. That's one of the things Gloria Steinem said about Jean's book. She said she thought it was the most, what was the word she used? I put it in my press kit, but it's something like, this is the most authentic description of original peoples that she knew of. And she was working with the head of the Cherokee Nation to write a book. Anyway, so let me just give you this example, because what you're talking about is very true, is relevant to this. Not in terms of being faced with the shit, but being faced with what we would consider excruciating pain. So this is on her first trip. And so she went to the jungle with Count Enrico Middleton. She's an Upper West Side Manhattan socialite. She goes to Europe. She meets all these different people. And then eventually she teams up with this guy. It was not a romantic relationship. She thought he was very arrogant. And so she went with him and his financier, Beppe Orlando. So those are the characters. And she's now with the Tarapin tribe, who were the guides taking them upriver, 3 weeks on the river or something. So one day, without warning, the river halved in volume. They were surrounded by a dense growth of asparagus, ficus, and philodendron. Enrico recognized this passage. He had traversed it before, and he began to describe the challenge that lay ahead in detail. We'll have to climb over the steep granite wall next to Arpucci Falls, he said. How steep, Jean asked. Quite, Enrico replied, avoiding her eyes. This is the passage you told me about, Beppe frowned nervously. Yes, Enrico replied. Then, with a single slow nod of his head, this is the one. Still avoiding Jean's gaze, he went on. They placed logs across the path of the canoe and haul it inch by inch. The sun is merciless. You could easily get heat stroke. He described the pain he'd experienced time and again when the canoe would slip into a crevice between boulders and pivot out of control, scraping his shins and ankles against the granite. Jean's face remained stoic. Beppe looked horrified. Fearing what lay ahead, the three of them spent several days bracing themselves for the hard work and pain that was sure to follow. They arrived at the waterfall full of dread and primed to suffer, already hating every moment of the portage. They started off grim-faced, dragging the canoe up the rocky slope. When the canoe swung sideways, the sheer weight of it would pin a member of the work party to a burning rock while the others scrambled to move it off. A quarter of the way up, all ankles were bleeding. By way of begging off for a bit, Jean jumped ahead to photograph the scene. She climbed up 10 yards and perched high on a rock. From that vantage point, at a distance from the action, she noticed a curious fact. There, before her, was a group of men engaged in a single shared task. Two of them were tense, frowning, losing their tempers at everything and everyone, cursing in the distinctive way of Tuscan men. The Tarapin guides, on the other hand, were having a fine time of it. They were laughing at the unwieldy canoe and making a game of the battle with gravity and rock. Between pushes, they showed off their scrapes and bruises. When, once again, the canoe would wobble forward, pin one, then another of them underneath it, they responded with amusement rather than upset. The fellow who was barebacked against the scorching granite invariably laughed the loudest once he could breathe again. All the men were doing the same work. All were experiencing strain and pain. All were sweating in the blazing hot sun. There was no difference in their situations except one. Jean and the Italians had been conditioned by their culture to believe that such a combination of circumstances was at the very bottom of the scale of well-being. What's more, they were quite unaware they had a choice, any other option as to how they could experience that situation. The guides were equally unaware of their choice. These supposedly primitive people had also been conditioned to deal with their circumstances in a particular way. They knew what lay ahead, but hadn't spent the days before the trek wallowing in dread. Quite the contrary. They approached the portage in a perfectly merry mood. They seemed to revel in the camaraderie. Each forward move of the canoe was viewed as a victory, a cause for celebration.
That's it, and it's in my head. I'm going, all right. I was in the military. That's basic training. Literally, they condition you to enjoy. What the word is, enjoy the suck. So
enjoy the sun.
The suck.
Enjoy the suck.
Enjoy
this sucks. Enjoy the. That's
so
great.
You wrap you find joy in the common struggle.
Oh,
and that's how you build the camaraderie in a unit, and whether it's SWAT team or military, or whatever. But it's also, if you think about, and I'm not a fan of it, but CrossFit. CrossFit is literally a bunch of people going through the same misery, finding joy in their camaraderie of going through it, and then having this like after party going, that was awesome. It sucked, but that was awesome.
We did it. Like, wow. Yes. And it pushes you at every level. And there's something exhilarating about being pushed like that.
Yeah.
No yes. Doubt. Beautiful. I love that. Now, let me make sure I got it right. Is it love the suck? SUCK?
It's either embrace the suck or love the suck. So
love the suck. That has so many different meanings, like suck it up. Yep. This sucks,
So many, because it fits for 40 different things you're going to be doing while you're in the military that nobody really wants to do, but you end up doing it anyways. And then when you're done, you go, okay, that was amazing.
That wasn't so bad. And you bonded as a result of it.
And if it was bad, at least we did it together. And we found that commonality amongst each other and that respect for one another. So you see you see who the weak ones are. And then your goal is to help bring them to where they're no longer the weak one. And then their joy of knowing that someone didn't just leave them behind and took the time to come and grab them and say, okay, this is what we got to work on. Your shit's got to get squared away, or else, we're all fucked. And, it's like my in the military, they don't do it anymore, but you had a battle buddy, and it's usually your bunkmate in basic training, and whatever happened to one happened to the other. Wow. So if your bunkmate's a soup sandwich, we call them, somebody who just doesn't have his shit together. Your job, soup sandwich, yeah. You got to get him squared away, because or else your time's gonna be spent being penalized for stuff you didn't do. But it's that ownership of one another's future.
That's beautiful.
Helps create that bonding. Wow. So and
they don't do that anymore. Why did they?
Because it's a kinder, gentler military now.
Oh wow.
They don't, which I find to be counterintuitive, but that's a whole nother podcast.
Right.
So we have about 5 minutes, and I just wanted to, first of all, this was awesome. I could do this for another 2 hours, just because I'm watching your brain work, and I find that extremely intriguing. How vast the knowledge. It's like a universe up in there, and I want to dig a little deeper. So I'm going to invite you back for another episode.
Great. I love it.
Where can people find your book?
Well, Jungle Gene is on Amazon.
Okay.
You can get it in any format you like. I just spoke to an audio producer yesterday about making the audiobook, which I'm excited about.
As long as you're reading it.
I'm going to read it. Believe me, I wouldn't let anyone else read it. My website is GeralynGendreau.com, which you'll have to look at the show notes to figure out how to spell.
It's in there.
So you can get on my email list. I do the blind spot work, and I am going to be running groups to have people help. It's such a common problem. I actually don't know anyone that doesn't have a blind spot. And then I'm also a writing coach. So I conduct groups. So people that, and I loved what you were talking about, love the suck, because what did you call it?
Embrace the suck.
Yep. Because this is what I do with groups of people who are trying to write a book. It's not like the military. It's not like taking on, an army, but people have so much resistance and so much struggle getting a book written. I'm going to use that one. I'm so stealing that line from the military. So there are lots of ways to get, to get my, like you said, my wild, crazy mind on your case. But mostly, I think when people read this book, it's life-changing. It certainly changed my life. And I get emails every day from people saying, oh my God, I read the continuum concept when I had kids, or I didn't have kids and I read it and it changed how I think. And they love this book because, well, here's the thing, the continuum concept is actually not an easy read, partly because Jean was such a genius. And in those days, it wasn't uncommon to write. If you read classics, there are many of them that they start with a paragraph long sentence.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know how to read that stuff anymore. And this reads more like a novel. It's an adventure story. So it's a lot easier. People can pick it up. I've had any number of people say I couldn't put the thing down. So
I love that because it seemed, just from when you read that excerpt, I could just tell that you were writing the story in such a captivating way.
yeah,
It's not a textbook. It's not a
no,
self-help book. It's a
yeah,
adventure. You said an adventure story, and I think regardless of Jean and what she meant to you, and regardless of what her expertise was in nurturing and learning how to nurture children, the fact that you wrote her story
yes,
for her
yes.
in a way that probably has love, admiration, respect, and a little bit of honesty.
A lot of
honesty.
honesty. My relationship with her is in here. You see how I met her in the prologue, then I disappear until part 3 when I met her. So there's a timeline, but I didn't spare any, I didn't try and maintain her heroic image.
Right. I think that's important.
Yeah.
That integrity of the story is really important. When I wrote my book, and my book's nowhere near the masterpiece yours is, but mine was written, I wrote 26,000 words in one night.
Wow. 26. Wow. That was
an emotional breakdown. And I had been in depression and for 13 years after my brother died. And then it all just sort of came out one night.
Wow. Did that resolve the depression or begin?
Everything. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Wow. That's beautiful. God, I got goosebumps.
My entire life happened in one night. And so when you were talking about how you relived your entire life and the impact, I literally was having this flood of, I'm crying, I'm having it was a mess. It was all night long, and I came back up at 7:30 in the morning, but I just wrote memories. So every memory of my brother just came flooding back, and I just was blah, 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 typing on the computer. Wow. My mom's a retired English teacher, and I said, Mom, I wrote 26,000 words of stories about Andy last night. What do I do? She goes, son, you write a book.
Yeah. God, you're giving me goosebumps. I'm having like waves of goosebumps. Did you say he was autistic?
Yeah, autistic. Before there was autism, but he was high functioning autistic. But with the thing that really was his problem was his stutter. It was the face contorting, eye rolling into the head kind of stuttering. So, sadly, he was killed in a car accident when I was 18.
And you were his big brother who was older?
Brother.
You were his little brother. Wow.
But I was the big brother by proxy.
Sure.
It was 2.5 years difference between us, but but yeah. No, he was the best. But I when people read my book, they can hear my voice. Even people that have never met me, they're like, and then when I talk to them, it goes, that's the voice I heard in my head.
Wow.
And that's, when you can have an impact on a reader, and I'm not a reader. I'm a high school graduate. I'm certainly not some super thespian or somebody who reads a shit ton of books. But what I wanted to do was write something that was honest.
Well, it sounds like you poured your heart into it.
I didn't have a choice.
And that's exactly what I did with this. It was like, I'd written a lot of books. I'm a gifted writer. I can actually say that. But this had my heart.
Yeah.
And I poured everything I have into it. So yeah, it sounds like you did the same with your book. Yeah.
Well, I could do this all night. Hang tight. Okay. We're going to talk off the air. Everybody, thank you. And thank you, Geralyn, for being on the show.
Really a pleasure.
I think people are going to be buying this book and really excited to get to meet her through your eyes. And I think it's important that people share other people's stories so that even if they're not the most perfect human being, their story lives on. And I'd learned once before, I was speaking at a conference for this company, a sales company, and I asked the CEO why he lives his life. And he says, because I don't want to be forgotten. And he said, he had heard that you die twice, when you take your last breath and when your name is spoken for the last time.
Oh,
and
wow.
when you write a book about somebody, their name will never not be spoken again. So that's why I wrote the book for my brother. I didn't want his name to ever not be spoken again. And I think it's important that we do that for others. So Thank you for doing that for her.
Beautiful. Yes.
Everybody, thank you for listening to this episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I am your host, Matt Cubbler. Once again, go to YouTube if you want to follow the videos of this. It's Matt Cubbler is my channel. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, that little alert bell thingy jing, then you hit that too so you get alerts. Go to mattcubbler.com to get a copy of Brothers Love a Memoir. And please go to geralyngendreau.com for any information on her and to get a copy of her book. All right, everybody, God bless, and go out and be kind to one another.